Hello YouTube, this is Sam Gerrans from Qur'anite.com. Today is Friday the 31st of December 2021 and I'm going to just push on with another of my series of Suras between 50 and the end of the Qur'an. Today it's number 87. I'm going to try to stay on topic, so this may be a faster video than the last few. So let's just jump in. Glorify thou the name of thy Lord the Most High, who created and fashioned, and who determined and guided, and who brought forth the pasture, then made it blackening, decaying herbage. Now, I'm going to stop here now. When you sort of emancipate the text from pre-existing outcomes and so on, and start to realize that it is an interlocking structure with signposts which reference different parts of the Quran, then things become a lot easier. Now, what I would say here is Sabbih, glorify thou the name of thy Lord the Most High. So if you've read through from Surah 50 to this point, you'll recognize this. And in my translation, I'm not saying other translations are all bad or anything like that. It's definitely not my position. But with this particular verb, I consistently, in fact, I think I exclusively translate it as glorify or glorify thou. So the reader can get a sense of where other things come. Now, just as a point, actually, this is going to be a bit of an aside, but as a translator, you're walking a fine line, and between being literal and readable, and it's not always easy. In my translation, I've sometimes taken a hit on the readability because the actual literal translation gives the non-Arabic reader access to what's going on underneath, and there are some very fine sort of more poetic translations out there. But I think that with somebody without access to the underlying Arabic, it's very easy to get lost in the mechanics of what's going on. All that to say, if we look at 87 here, this is it's an imperative to an individual, to the recipient of the Quran. Glorify thou. So this is an imperative to Muhammad himself. Okay. Now this verb, if you have access to the Arabic, clearly references. There's a section between 57 and 66, if I'm not mistaken. a series of 10 surahs, which I will talk about in a forthcoming piece of work. But what we find here is at 56, half of these, 5 of these 10, use the same verb, but it's not an imperative, it's a description. Sabbaha lillahi ma fi samawati wal ard. What is in the heavens and the earth gives glory to God. Let's go on a bit further. Excuse me. Here we are at 59. What is in the heavens and what is in the earth gives glory to God. There are 5 of them here. 61. What is in the heavens, excuse me, and what is in the earth gives glory to God. This is the same. 62. What is in the heavens and what is in the earth gives glory to God. So, all that to say, it's one of the reasons why I perhaps stay on the literal. Well, I do. I stay on the literal, consistent line of translation. It doesn't result in the most beautiful translation, but that's not what I'm aiming at. If you want beautiful translations or exalted sounding translations, then they exist. Abdul Yusuf Ali, he sort of tries to kind of pull in just underneath the sort of the back of King James English and so on. And does it sound nice? Yes, certainly it sounds nice. But is it correct? Is it closer? Not in my opinion. There are another translation, A.J. Arbery, I think he cuts a very good line actually between the two. I have got a lot of time for his translation, and I refer to it. He's one of the key translations that I refer to in the notes to my translation. Just as a bit of background, in my work, The Qur'an, A Complete Revelation, the notes to that, I don't know what they are exactly, but I should think about 300,000 words, something like that. And one part of what I do there is I compare, or I demonstrate what certain types of translator do with the text. And I take three basic camps. I've got on the sort of, as at the middle of the road, I would say as a fair representation of what the Sunni position is. Well, certain types of Sunni position. I use the Sahih International Translation, which is a fair translation and presentation of that position. I use A.J. Arbery and N.J. Dawood as more literal translators. Arbery was an Arabist, and he translated all sorts of things. And he didn't. I mean, obviously, if your job is to present something that the publisher is going to like and that isn't going to get you killed, so that's really what your job there is. And then you've got what I would describe as the sort of more mystical and intelligent religionist position, which is embodied by Muhammad Asad, who was a Jewish convert to the Sunni religion. And I quote him all over the place. He's a very intelligent man, very thoughtful man. Obviously, he ran out of patience with all of this, because he was involved in the early days of the Pakistan experiment. And quite frankly, I think he was quite naive. I think he believed that they were going to be able to create this new and wonderful society. And when it turned into corrupt and inefficient and incompetent, he left and lived out his days in Andalusia in Spain. And then you've got Hilali and Khan, who sometimes they're actually grammatically correct, and sometimes they're on point. But this is really the sort of dagger wielding nutcase kind of position. If the Qur'an really meant what they say it does, because it's all drawn through Hadith. My own personal engagement with this book would have lasted all of 15 minutes, but that isn't the case. But I present all of these in my translation in the notes, not to attack people. It's not that. And where people are correct, I'll identify that, but to really expose particular dogmas underlying this to somebody who hasn't got access to the Arabic. I've been through, in the process of my own work, I've been through not only my own translation process, but compared, especially in the second round of clearing this work, pulling this work together, of comparing that with particular ideologies. And if you don't speak a second language, or you've never worked as a translator, and I do both, or I have done in my life, I mean, worked as a professional translator, or translation has been a part of my work, let's put it that way, you won't perhaps be aware that how much pre-existing expectations, or just simply understanding, will colour that. It's natural. I mean, this isn't something that's unique to the Islamic narrative by any means. I mean, if you go to look at the Hare Krishnas and the Bhagavad Gita, and more broadly the Vedas, I mean, the Vedas are untranslatable, and a lot of the arguments that you'll hear within the Church of Islam, you'll hear there too regarding translation. So it's not that there is a sort of a neutral translation that is necessarily possible. So part of what my work has been to develop a hermeneutic, a way of approaching scripture that can be proven within the terms of that scripture. Now, that's not to say that my methodology cannot be improved upon. That's never been my position. My position has been to give a demonstration of how this works, in order that other people can improve it. It is difficult, I know, because I've done this. I know how hard it is, but it doesn't mean it's especially if you had a team of very bright people with some proper funding, this is possible. It really is. So that's what I've been doing is giving a demonstration of that. This is the scientific method. It's not that, I mean, in the days when we had real science, I'm not talking about now, of course, but it's something that you present your thesis, you demonstrate, you present all of your working out, and it's understood that in the future, better and brighter men may come along and improve on that and take it forward. That's how it should be. That's normal. All that to say, in this work, I certainly do. I come down on the line of literalism and consistency, because that's implicit in my process. I hope that I've sort of explained that reasonably well. Coming back to this, so what I'm saying is I'm using the same verb in the English, glorify thou, glorify, so that the reader of English with no access to what's going on, the underlying root structure and so on of the Arabic can pick up on these connections. All that to say that the opening here, glorify thou the name of thy Lord the Most High, the verb itself acts as a signpost to that series or cluster of Suras between 57 and 66, which use this not as an imperative. It's not telling you glorify, do this. It's explaining what's happening. The heavens and the earth glorify God. It's the same verb, okay? So these things, these are descriptive, those 5 surahs that I identified, clearly correlate to this. And okay, let's just leave that there. Okay. Glorify thou the name of thy Lord, the Most High, who created and fashioned, and who determined and guided, and who brought forth the pasture, then made it blackening, decaying herbage. We will make thee recite, and thou wilt not forget, save that God should will. He knows the apparent and the hidden. Now, I'm going to stop off here because there's quite a lot to unpack here, and I've got some of my notes up on the screen, so if you see me looking over in this direction, that would be why. Now, the dogma of the traditionalist is that, and you can understand, I suppose, if you looked very specifically at this context, without any consideration of what goes on in the broader Qur'an, we will make thee recite and thou wilt not forget, save that God should will. You can drive a truck through this, right? Save that God should will. If you took this out of context, and this is really the bread and butter of much of the traditionalists' polemical engagement with the Qur'an, when I'm talking about when he's having to defend his position against other people who know this book really, really well, or even just slightly, is that he will take, a line, what the messenger gives you, take, what he forbids you, leave, and that's an argument, 1/3, one middle section of a verse taken completely out of context. The context being, of course, the distribution of the spoils of war, or this is, it's obvious, but he's relying upon your ignorance, and quite frankly, he's very rarely proven that that's a bad position. But when you do know where this comes from, you see how hollow these arguments are, and they are hollow, and they're cynical and really infantile. Now, in this case, I wouldn't say that it's of the same sort of flavour of cynicism here. It may just be a mistake, but what I can do is point to why I disagree with it. Now, in my notes, I quote Muhammad Asad quite a lot, and explain what the traditionalist's view in his summary is. And then I explain why I don't agree with it. And the reason why I don't agree with it is because a phenomenon that is quite obvious within the Qur'an, and not I alone, but other translators discern this, is of parenthetical statements, nested statements. We do this in English. You just sort of saying something, and then you make an aside, and then you continue. But how do you discern these? How do you point to these? On what basis are you saying that this is the case? Well, I would say it's the case in terms of context, but more than that, I can prove Quranically why the traditionalist view is incorrect. Now, the traditionalist view is we will make thee recite and thou wilt not forget, save that God should will. So the idea is that Muhammad is going to forget something. And there you are. Now, that's a real, that's that you've got a sort of a kind of highway of possibilities through which you can say, he forgot this, he forgot that, or whatever it is. But that isn't what's going on here. And I'm going to tell you why. Let's just go back a little bit. Who created and fashioned, and who determined and guided, and who brought forth the pasture, then made it blackening, decaying herbage. Now I'm going to say what follows is in parentheses, so let's just leave it for a second. Save that God should will. Now, if you look at the natural world, there are deciduous and other types of trees. There are trees which lose their leaves, and those leaves decompose. And then there are evergreen trees, correct? And this is true of herbage in general. There are different types. Then made it blackening, decaying herbage, save that God should will. And then it continues, he knows the apparent and the hidden. Now I'm saying that all relates to what went before, which is glorify thou the name of thy Lord, the Most High, who created and fashioned, and who determined and guided, and who brought forth the pasture. This is, and then made it blackening, decaying herbage. This is of one kind, and we have many segments across the Qur'an which reference different types of degrees of progression, of growing, and so on and so forth, and it fits into that entire genre. Now we have what I'm saying is a nested or a parenthetical statement. We will make thee recite, and thou wilt not forget. Now, I'm going to have to read because I've got this written down, and I can't summarize it any better than I wrote it. First of all, I state in my notes what at least one of the classical views of what's going on, and now I'm going to tell you why I don't agree with it. The classical commenters have not sufficiently embraced the Qur'an's use of implicit punctuation, i.e. how certain portions of the text cry out that they are asides, something that you say while you're saying something else, and should be regarded as parenthetical. Thus, this clause relates to the climax of 87:5 above. And I'm talking here about save that God should will. Now I'm going to talk about the recite. That we will make thee recite, and thou wilt not forget. This clause, which I'm saying is parenthetical to what's going on in this part of the surah, is merely a precursor to the only place in the Qur'an where the Prophet is told personally, i.e. do thou this, to recite. Okay, many places in the Qur'an he's told to say, "Qul," say thou this, say thou that, many times. But only once, in only one place, only in one surah is he told, recite thou. Okay. So this is another nail in the coffin of the traditionalist stock of fictions which hold that the 96th surah or chapter was the first revelation received. Now, why is this? Now, here it says, we will make thee recite. And the verb here, although Arabic is somewhat deficient in terms of tense, this is it has sa at the beginning. It's a future thing. We will make this happen in the future. It's something that absolutely hasn't happened yet. And it's the same verb. We will make thee. Well, it's the form four of that same root. And this is the only one in the text. Okay, so I'm going to make this trying to simplify this. There's a root. Okay. Which is qara'a. Now, there is only one place where Muhammad is told, Iqra, to recite thou. It's the only place. There's only one place. Here it says, we will make thee recite. And there's only one place where this verb form happens. Logically, it's impossible. It's impossible for Surah 96 to have been the first revelation. Just impossible. If someone says to you, I'm going to make you do this, and then he makes you do it, which of those two came first? It's logically impossible on the basis of the Quranic text. I'm not doing this to kind of spite the traditionalists. I'm just trying to demonstrate that his background, his hermeneutic process is unsustainable. And when you look at it in detail, quite honestly, well, lamentably insufficient, unfit for purpose. That's what I'm saying. But rather than just criticizing that, I'm presenting an alternative and just demonstrating it. So, on the basis of the internal evidence, Quranic evidence, that view is unsustainable since 87.6 here simply must have preceded chapter 96. And to continue, we will make thee recite and thou wilt not forget must be parenthetical, because to what else could it refer? It can only refer to this one instance where God tells Muhammad, recite thou. The Qur'an is an interlocking structure. It's utterly awesome, to use modern parlance, but it requires application and importing an extraneous body of hearsay. It can only corrupt that any sensible process of hermeneutical analysis and exegesis based thereon can only be corrupted in the sense that impure, especially in the context of a book that says that it is from God, that God will preserve it, written down on sheets at the time, perfect. Now, either you believe that or you don't. Now, I'm approached quite a lot. Well, what about the good hadith? Now, the good hadith is a problem. It's a problem because it's not a matter of whether you like it, you don't like it, what you might like, you might not. Firstly, let's take the broader context, which is the Qur'an, which claims to be from God, that He will preserve it. Not the traditionalist, not hadithism. No, God. God Himself says that He will take it, that He will do it. Either you believe He did, or you don't. If you don't, let's just go to the pub. Let's just forget all about it and just go and just do something else. But if it is true, then that has consequences, correct? So that's the first thing. Second thing, the biggest problem actually, well, an equally difficult problem, I mean, that's the short version, is that the basis upon which all of this happens, because the traditionalist position has always been that there's this interlocking structure between how good somebody's memory was supposed to be, how virtuous they were supposed to be, and this incredible, what I would call a pseudoscience, complete waste of time. It's utterly, in my view, ridiculous. But if you're going to take that as your position, that this hadith is, reliable on this and this and this basis, or slightly less reliable or more reliable, whatever it is, you can't mess with the underlying philosophy, because once you do that, then everything else just falls apart. And they know this. The traditional scholars, they know this. That's why they're terrified. But rather than just say, you're wrong and here's why, this work shows you're wrong. Well, to some extent, I don't concentrate on that, but you're wrong, here's why, and here's something that works. Why not use something that actually works? Well, I mean, part of the reason is quite clear, isn't it? Because once you do that, then, well, firstly, I suppose it's a bit like the moon landings. You have a real problem sort of going back to the moon, because if you do, it's going to show that the first time round was fake. That's, I think, a bit too difficult, but also there's not an awful lot for them to do. I mean, the whole point of religious overlay is that it micromanages and takes your money. So, what else are they going to do? They can't really do anything useful. They're not trained for anything else. They're only trained for this. So, I can see why there's resistance there. But they're going to have to get with it one day. They might as well start now. And my advice would be, make a clean break with it. It's tough to recognise that you've been lied to and duped I know. I came to read the Qur'an after experience with Christianity and perhaps, a particular kind of flavour of it. Of course it's difficult to realise that, the whole Trinity thing is a lie. It's just a lie. There isn't really much more to say. You can keep dancing and tap dancing and going round and round in circles, but it's a lie. It's not true. And sure, it's difficult to recognise that, but isn't it better to do that than to continue in something which is self-evidently nonsensical? And Muslims and Jews and even certain types of Christians, they recognise this. They know this. So this is just all I'm. It's not. It's not a huge shame to have been duped and lied to and conned. Where the responsibility kicks in is when you insist on sticking to it when it's clearly not true. When it's evident, that you've been duped. Now, this whole modernizing thing about, we're going to keep some, just kind of hit this point because this is important. We're going to keep some hadith. On what basis? Because you like them? The wind's blowing in a particular direction today. What happens if the wind changes? And it will. And, if we've learnt one thing about living in the Marxist agenda of the last 50, 60, 80, 100 years, is that the wind changes, and it changes every day. But we know that God's word stands firm. According to the Qur'an, it doesn't change. It doesn't change. It doesn't change his mind. It's fixed. Now, the problem with the modernizing Muslim is he's trying to ingratiate himself with the feminists and all these other people. The Quran doesn't really mean it when it says this, and it doesn't really mean it when it says that. I'll tell you one thing about these Marxists, these leftists, they will never, ever stop. Ever. You can't give up enough ground for them because it's not about truth for these people. It's about power. Okay? So you're going to have to take stand at some point. So stand on the Qur'an, which says it's from God, it says it's preserved, it says it's perfect, it says it's the best hadith, if you like that word so much, rather than, making friends, being bedfellows with these people. Anyway, that's that. I'm going to continue. Save that God should will. He knows the apparent and the hidden. And we will ease thee towards ease. So remind thou, if the reminder should benefit. He will heed who fears. But the most wretched will avoid it, who will burn in the great fire. Then will he neither die therein nor live. He is successful who has purified himself, and remembers the name of his Lord, and performs the duty. Now I'm going to stop here because this is a big one. The argument, or one of the most common sort of responses to my work at least is, so how do you pray? This seemingly convincing argument, which is that, what it means is, how do you know to obey the imperatives in the Qur'an if you're not going to read something other than it? That's what it basically means. And then what it does is it takes a definition which is not from the Qur'an, imports it into the Qur'an and says, there you are. This is a straw man argument. This is a very silly in the sense of unsophisticated form of rhetorical manipulation. That's what I mean by that. Which works with children. It's designed to intimidate people who don't really know their own subject. But I'm going to kind of answer this one here because I think there's a limit on the amount of time I'm going to spend discussing these sorts of subjects. Firstly, what do you mean by prayer? Now, when a Westerner is talking about prayer, he's talking about a range of things, actually, some of which may include some sort of physical aspect to it. But really what he means is a form of association or reflection upon God or appeal to God. Now, in the Qur'an we have dua, we have that, which is an appeal to God. But that's not what the traditionalist means when he's talking about prayer, not here at least, because it changes. If you watch him, it's like Find the Lady, the guy on London Bridge. This is what he's really fundamentally doing. He has a sort of a ritual which is a composite of parts cobbled together from another literature. And he says that this is prayer. Well, this is quite an imperfect distinction, because really prayer could, in the sense we mean it, may or may not be a part of this. You can go through the traditionalists' namaz without prayer being any part of that whatsoever. Prayer in the sense that I'm using the word. It's a physical ritual. So there's that. There's also the point that in his exposition, if you go through his translation, he is forced away from this value. It's not like he's got a consistent value that he can use all the way through. What about Bani Israel? It says that they, وَاسْتَعِينُوا بِالصَّبْرِ وَالصَّلَاةِ. They've never performed this ritual. I mean, you can say they're lying or they're hiding it, but they're not. They didn't ever do this. Not this. So you get into a very kind of dodgy area, and then that you have the additional problem that the traditionalists cannot point to a consistent value through the Qur'an for this, because he has to chop and change. He changes salawat into blessings. Well, blessings, is that what we mean by prayer? It's not what I mean by prayer, but that's what he has to have at certain places. He even is forced to use salawat, the plural of salat, as Jewish synagogues, because that's what happens, you see, when you try to force a hand, or even a foot rather, into a glove that's made for a hand. You can sort of seem to fit, but in places it just won't go. Just doesn't go. And this is his problem, and he knows this. I mean, they do know this. This is why they use shaming language and that sort of thing. The typical Marxist, sort of playbook, because they've got to shut you up. But so what does salat? What does it mean? It's quite clear if you take all 90-something uses of the word and the root, that that a value which is possible and sustainable in all places is an abstract noun, just like sabr, patience, an abstract noun. وَاسْتَعِينُوا بِالصَّبْرِ وَالصَّلَاةِ, and make use of sabr and salat. You see, but he doesn't want that. He doesn't want that value because it cuts him out of. It destroys the priesthood. Now, am I saying that that worship in the kind of in the traditional classical sense of the word is not a duty? No, I'm not saying that. What I am saying is that not all worship in the classical traditional sense is salat. It's the same thing as to say that whilst all oranges are fruit, not all fruit are oranges. It's childlike, isn't it? But this is what they do. And because people can't spend the time that I've spent going through this book, they can't argue with it because they're just intimidated by this barrage of often quite aggressive but seemingly erudite accusation. Have you read this? This philosopher said this, and this philosopher said that, and so thought this in 1427. Who cares? Who cares what they said? This book says this, that it's from God, it's complete, it's consistent, and he'll protect it. Now that's what it says. What they do is they get you all wrapped up in all of this complex looking stuff, and it's intimidating. It's meant to intimidate, but it isn't really that difficult. And you see, if these things are not so, then all the rest of this stuff, all of this, whirlwind of Arabic and history and philosophers and all the rest of it counts for nothing. You just go straight for the jugular. This is it. That's it. Simple, isn't it? Now, it doesn't mean that there isn't, one doesn't have to study and all the rest of it, sure. But the hermeneutic system that they've been using is flawed. All I'm doing is showing why, and not just criticizing, but presenting a system that does work, so that if we survive, I think we're kind of at the end of things. But if there is going to be a future civilization at some point, if it chooses to, it can have an option to do something other than just repeat this. Also, the what I call brand Islam is being imported into the West as a pawn, it's a pawn of the New World Order. It's quite obvious. It's just another, like Black Lives Matter, like feminism, like all the other stuff, like the Sodomite agenda, to destroy the West. And if we carry on, the formerly free Western countries are all going to look like wherever it is. Soweto, whatever it is, they're going to just be, just feces in the street and mugging and, carjacking and all the things you get when there is no order. So, you hear the brand Islamists saying, your sons are going to be Muslim and we're going to... No, what's going to happen is it's just going to be just chaotic and insane, which is the point, and that those people are being used, wittingly or unwittingly, probably unwittingly, in order to further an agenda that they have absolutely no conception of. This is real politics, how it works. But rather than just say what they're doing is bad and evil, it's much better to present another option. And the thing is, just as a final point on this, for me, with my engagement with the Qur'an, if I'd reached a point with it where I thought, this clearly isn't from God, there's no continuing on this basis, I would have stopped. I would have stopped and done something else. But in the times when I've reached those seeming walls and persisted, and that wall breaks down, you go, wow. It's been more like, paleontology or archaeology or something, this process. So I've seen more than enough to convince me and keep me interested and convinced over what's now 8 years. I've been doing this full time for 8 years. So I'm convinced of its veracity, but I have very little time for those kind of arguments based on how do you pray and this sort of nonsense. And obviously the corollary to that is people saying, well, how do you pray? How do you pray? I've been copying these guys, now I want to copy you. That isn't the point. The point is not the... You remember school with maths? I mean, I'm going back now to the time when maths was actually maths, when maths wasn't an opinion or racially motivated or something, but actual maths, 2 + 2 is actually 4. I mean, going back quite a long time now, but in the 1970s, when I was growing up, there was this thing called actual maths, maths that wasn't being promoted by women with, blue hair and stuff. My maths master, he was very clear. It's not just about having the right answer. It's about understanding how you got to that answer. So even if your answer is wrong, it's not about a right answer necessarily. I mean, there is a right answer and you can get to it, but it's much more important to understand how you got to it, so that you, rather than just having a fish, you can learn how to fish. This process, this is the core of it, and this is really what I'm trying to sort of emphasize here. Anyway, let's just wrap this up. I did say this was going to be a short one. Was anyone ever so young? Let's just kind of finish up. But the most wretched will avoid it, who will burn in the great fire. Then will he neither die therein nor live. He is successful who has purified himself and remembers the name of his Lord and performs the duty. Just another thing, just to go back to this duty thing. Again, as an abstract concept, I'm not saying it's a direct correlation, but it's got a lot in common with dogma. Dharma is an abstract concept that your dharma, my dharma may be different things. Your duty and my duty, they may overlap, they may correspond, but they may be somewhat different, depending on what your place is, what your mission is, what your gender is. That's your duty, see? It's not going to be the same as mine. Now, for me to try to do yours is ad-dharma. It's anti-salat. And for you to try to do mine is the same thing. The difficulty so much is today is that people don't have any sense of where their natural place in things. And everyone wants to be Kim Kardashian or whoever it is. But we're not, and not everyone is beautiful, not everyone is young. You are going to get older. Your dharma, your salat as a baby is going to be different to that when you're a married man with responsibilities and so on. Why is this so complicated? I don't really get it, but it's been made complicated by means of over-specifying the general. That's why it's been made complicated. And guess who? That opens the floodgates to bearded men using magical language that intimidates you and stops you from doing your dharma, doing your salat. Yeah. Anyway, let's continue. The truth is, you prefer the life of this world when the hereafter is better and more enduring. This is in the former scriptures, the scriptures of Abraham and Moses. Now, just to wrap this up, Abraham, Moses, again, going back to what I was talking about earlier about the kind of signposts and interlocking structure of the Qur'an. The Qur'an mentions this elsewhere. Excuse me. I'm just pulling this up on another screen. And here we are at Surah 53, which mentions the scriptures of Moses and of Abraham, who discharged in full. And then it'll tell you what it says. So you don't have to guess. And it'll tell you, and I'll just read it to you. That no bearer of burdens bears the burden of another, and that man has not saved that for which he strove, and that his striving will be seen. Then will he be rewarded with the fullest reward, and that to thy Lord is the finality, and that it is he who makes laugh and makes weep, and that it is he who gives death and gives life, and that he created the two kinds, the male and the female, from a sperm drop when it was emitted, and that upon him is the next creation, and that it is he who makes free from need and causes to possess, and that it is he who is the Lord of Sirius, and that he destroyed the former Ad, and Thamud he spared not, and the people of Noah before, they were worse in wrongdoing and worse in transgression. And the overthrown cities he cast down, it's reference to Sodom and Gomorrah, and covered them with what he covered. Then which of the blessings of thy Lord dost thou dispute? Here's another signpost. You see, if you recognize this one, this will point you to Surah 55. This is a warner, and now this is a different subject. This is a warner like the former warners. The drawing near has drawn nigh. There is none besides God to remove it. Then do you marvel at this narrative and laugh and not weep, while you are puffed up in heedlessness, but submit to God and serve. And remember, we started this particular surah, glorify thou the name of thy Lord, the Most High. This is how you read this book, and I'm not saying this is the only way, but it is an interlocking structure. It answers the questions of the man who comes to it in sincerity and applies himself to it. You do have to purify yourself to that end. Now, I'm going to draw that to a close. All that to say, today is 31st of December, and the next moon for where I am begins on the 2nd. So I am going to engage in another 10-day fast, which I'm not going to talk about on this channel, but those who know the channel that relates to that, I'll just make a very short video, God willing, at the beginning and the end of that process. That's it. That's all for now. I hope everyone is well. I wish everyone a happy new year, as the saying goes, but the happiest new year is the one that starts in eternity and lasts forever. So anyway, I'll leave it there. Bye for now. If you're listening on YouTube, you can download my full translation of the Qur'an and all other work free using the button in the top right-hand corner, or buy the hard copy there at 10% less than on Amazon. You can download the audio from my YouTube videos to your mobile device using the links in the drop-down below. I recommend meetquranites.com to connect with other Qur'an-alone believers. Like if you like, comment if you have something constructive to say, and subscribe to get more each week. And use the link in the drop-down below to donate if you would like to help me keep doing this. And remember, this life is short, eternity is long. If you want good trees, plant good seeds.